You are freer than you think.
Is like the ultimate form of freedom.
You expound upon that freedom to develop on this planet.
True freedom comes from within. It's the ability.
Thinking to myself, I can help you or I can destroy you.
Man, as a two-time felon,
I work really hard, and I've been a life learner.
When things are feeling tough, let yourself be surprised.
The world favors risk-taking.
Welcome to the Freedom Pact. Hey, welcome back, my Freedom Pact family. I am your host, Joseph Newton, and this is the show that challenges conventional thinking and will lead you to freedom, whatever that may be defined by yourself. And the route we will take you on will go via self-optimization. What an incredible episode we have for you today on the show. We are joined by one of the leading pioneers in the field of healthcare, Dr. William Li. Will is a renowned physician, scientist, speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Eat to Beat Disease, the new science of how your body can heal itself. Will is best known for leading the Angiogenesis Foundation. His groundbreaking work has impacted more than 70 diseases in areas that include cancer, diabetes, blindness, heart disease, and obesity. This guy is the real deal. He is pretty much at the forefront of the field. Will's TED Talk, Can We Eat to Starve Cancer, has been viewed more than 11 million times. Will's appeared on major shows like Good Morning America, CNN, NPR, The Voice of America, and his work has been in features like The Atlantic Time, The New York Times, as well as publishing over 100 scientific publications that have been featured in journals like Science, which is pretty much as good as it gets. He's been in the New England Journal of Medicine and The Lancet. Dr. Li has served on the faculties of the Harvard Medical School, Tufts University, and Dartmouth Medical School. The beginning of this conversation is all about Will's background, and then we really delve deep into eating to beat disease. There's so much gold in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Will, it is a real treat for me to get to sit down and speak with you today. Welcome to the show.
It's a real pleasure, Joseph, to be on the show, and look forward to having a great conversation together.
I read Eat to Beat Disease a few months back, and ever since I read that, I have wanted to get you on the show. You are finally here on the other end of this Skype call. So let's start with your background, Will. What I found particularly interesting is that you trained as an internal medicine doctor, which, looking in from the outside, that would give you a holistic overview of health in terms of age, levels of health. When you combine this with the fact that you're also a vascular biologist, to me seems like a real key advantage that you would have, because this would give you a unique insight into health from two different ways. The vascular biologist would give you the advantage of looking into things like angiogenesis, which we're going to go into today. So let's start here, Will. What advantages have you gained from working these two fields simultaneously?
Yes, well, it's we call the combination of being a trained practicing physician and also a researcher that works in a laboratory at a very deep level. We are known as physician scientists. And what that means and the advantages it gives an individual who pursues such a career is that as a doctor trained in medicine, which allows us to approach, for me, internal medicine, anyone in the community, young and old, men and women, sick or healthy. The ability to have a conversation, do a physical exam, order some blood tests, and come up with an idea of someone's status of health or sickness, as the case may be. And that's a wonderful and I think a very powerful and a privilege to really be able to have from a healing perspective. Most doctors do actually have quite a lot of scientific exposure during their educational period. But once you get out into the field, so to speak, and you open up a clinic or you're in a hospital, you really have relatively little exposure to science, and the practice of medicine really has very strong elements of a trade, which is how do we practice our craft over and over and get better and better at what we do. Now, that is sort of one side of my background. The other side of my background as a vascular biologist is really as a scientist. And what's different about being a scientist is that we are asking new questions and we're challenging old assumptions. And so in my field of vascular biology, we're asking, how do blood vessels grow? What keeps them healthy? Why do they get sick? What can we do naturally or pharmacologically using medicines to actually get them back into better shape, or ideally back to health itself? And in some cases, you can actually use tissue engineering and actually grow artificial blood vessels if the body can't grow them fast enough. And so as a scientist, my job is to ask questions, challenge past assumptions, make progress forward in terms of new knowledge. And, while a doctor in practice can really accomplish quite a lot to help a patient feel better and get better in a short period of time, science is actually a much steeper hill to climb, much more disciplined and rigorous because we are building our knowledge brick by brick. But the advantage of actually, for myself, being a physician scientist is combining both of these identities together allows me to see a patient and do what I do as a scientist, which is ask the question, what might be going on? What do we yet not know about why this person is healthy or sick? And although doctors have the proverbial black bag of treatments that we've developed over the decades and even centuries, the reality is that we unfortunately still are not able to cure many of the diseases that we would like to. And so part of my job as a physician scientist is to see a patient and ask the question, ask questions that will challenge the assumptions. Is the treatment that we've been taught to give a patient really the best treatment? Is there something better we should be doing, or perhaps a more loaded way of sort of stating what I just said is, challenging the standards of care. Is what we're doing as standard in medicine good enough, or could we actually be doing better? And that's really the advantage, I think, the advantages, I think, for my background of both a practicing doctor as well as a scientist.
I'd really love to drill in on this standard of medicine. For everybody that's listening now, we had a great conversation about this with a great friend of the show, and for us personally, Dr. Will Bulshevitz, Dr. B as we like to call him. Are you aware of Dr. B, Will?
I've met him before, but just I think mostly in passing, and we've had some similar paths where we've met each other.
Yeah, Dr. B, he is a great guy, and I remember the episode that we did with him, which for anybody listening now, they can go and check out. I believe off the top of my head that it's number 33 in our library. The episode that we did with Dr. B, it just completely blew up. It was a top 50 podcast in the UK. It reached number 1 in places like Iceland, Norway, Sweden. It was top 10 in Jordan. It was in Israel. It was everywhere, this episode. And we think that it was largely due to the fact that in the episode, Will highlighted that there was systemic issues of the education that a medical student will receive. Now, I can't remember the exact figure that Will said, but I remember he told me that all of the education that he received into nutrition came down to a single module, which only lasted for a few weeks. I remember Lewis and myself, who was my co-host, we were just absolutely shocked by this. And the feedback that we had after this from emails, from Instagram messages, it was that, people actually thought that he was joking. Like, people legit thought that Dr. B was joking about this. They thought that it just couldn't be possible. So to me, if that is in fact the case, then that seems like an enormous systematic issue. So I wonder, Will, the other Will, you of course, did you have a similar experience to this? And do you think that in fact that there could be a potential systematic problem?
Yes, my experience is very similar, and I'll give you my own sort of how I encountered this myself. As some of your listeners may know, getting into medical school is quite a feat involving a lot of studying and test taking and qualifications, and this is true anywhere in the world. And once you get into medical school, we are literally given, let's say, 4,000 years of Western medical knowledge, with the most intensive components being what we've learned in the last 50, squeezed into 4 years of training, and of which about 50% of that is really mostly coursework, and the other half of it is hands-on learning the actual sort of tradecraft of seeing patients and caring for them. So in 2 years, let's say, we're taking the last 50 years of medical science and compressing it into a series of lectures and tests. And the argument that most of the medical educators, the deans, so to speak, of medical education have always argued is that what we are taught, what they teach, is based on the latest cutting edge science. And because nutrition until recently hasn't really been as sophisticated as pharmacology or genetics or biochemistry, it's long been regarded by the medical establishment as sort of a secondary field of science, of health, less worthy of the short time that is only available for medical students to learn what they need to learn. And as you might imagine, year after year of this kind of thinking, with more and more detailed science and pharmacology coming out, really pushes out, and I would say that there's been a prejudice developed against nutrition research where it's not even taken seriously in most medical school curriculum. So for myself, I think over the course of my career, my formal career through education, less than 4 weeks of training in nutrition at all, right? And yet every single one of my patients I've seen always asks me some question about health. Now, many of them will never ask me about questions about HIV drugs or fancy, conditions related to, glands or hormones. but everyone asks me about nutrition, and yet that's something that doctors are, medical doctors are so poorly informed on. Here's some United States statistics. Only 1 in 5 medical schools in the United States require medical students to take any nutrition course. Only 1 in 5. That means 20%. 80% of schools do not have any requirement. And in terms of the postgraduate program training, so that means after you graduate and you're in practice, there are so few courses available to continue the education on nutrition that it is deeply embarrassing, I think, for most practicing doctors out there to be confronted with a valid question from a patient about nutrition, and then to feel so ignorant about the subject matter, when pretty much consumers at large, and other healthcare professionals, definitely nutritionists, but also even a fitness trainer, is going out there spending time. And I think this is part of it, having the priority to spend the energy and the time to learn and keep up with the science of nutrition. But all this is changing now. And so I think that, and I'm hoping to be one of the people to really make a big dent in changing the past. I think now students going to medical school, and indeed, I think some of the more progressive medical educators are realizing that we need to broaden our scope, both in terms of learning as well as in teaching, and that ultimately having a good, solid grounding in the science of nutrition is going to make our society healthier, as well as more satisfied at the medical level in how we practice medicine. So we have a more complete view of what we can do for our patients. Let's say another important set of tools in our toolbox.
It's interesting, Will, when we interview people like Dr. B, Professor David Sinclair, who was very recently on the show, the impression that I get speaking to these great minds, a lot like yourself, is that the people in the field are extremely optimistic. And one of the reasons is that it seems like the science of nutrition is just moving at 100 miles per hour. I'd love to know, how fast is the science of nutrition moving in your eyes, Will?
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 fields that are moving really quickly that interlace with one another. One is the science of nutrition, which is based on, centuries-old knowledge of thinking about vitamins and minerals as sort of core elements, and then builds on thousands of years of sort of tribal knowledge that humankind has always known about the importance of food. So rather than thinking about nutrition as sort of something that has been in the dark ages all this time, what I would say is that collectively in humankind, we've always recognized how important nutrition is. What's happened, I think, is that probably starting in the mid 20th century, so the 1960s and onwards, let's call it up until the new millennium, 40, 50 years, there's been so much a shift in emphasis towards biotechnology and biopharmaceuticals and medical devices, cool things that science can create, that we lost focus, lost prioritization on nutrition, but it's always been there. What's happening now that's driving the speed of nutrition, I think, as my colleagues, Dr. Sinclair and Bolshevitz actually talk about, is really the fact that we're now beginning to re-acknowledge the fact that nutrition is important, and we're pulling out of the closet what's long been understood implicitly to be important for our health. Now, the thing that's really driving the science itself, which is data, which is research studies involving genetics, cells, animals, humans, populations, driving that forward is because, in fact, coming from, ironically, the research that's been done for biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. Because what's happened in the last 20, 30 years, there's been this astounding explosion of knowledge. In the last 25 years, there have been more than 800 new drugs approved by the US FDA. 800. And each of these drugs that have been produced and approved and are used in the practice of medicine have left in their wake, during the development stage, all this research to help us understand what happens when the body falls apart, which then gives us the insight, what can we do to actually put it back together again? And also gives us the insight, if a drug can work this way, how might foods be able to activate a similar effect, and not just drug? And so what's happening now is that the science of health and disease, driven by the last 2 decades of biotechnology, has served up to us in present day this enormous set of powerful tools to be able to look at not just what's in, what kind of foods are good for us, but how does the body respond to the foods that we put inside it? And then to also be able to look at and reignite our attention to nutrition. So, one of the things that, we've already been talking about, Joseph, is the fact that, in the world of health and, medicine, nothing is black and white. Nothing is simple. It's usually a combination of things that are actually leading to the present day and to the future, indeed. And in terms of the speed of development of the science of nutrition, it is moving incredibly fast, driven by our knowledge of how the body works when you put something inside it. And the same knowledge is the kind of knowledge that has already been proven to be useful in the enterprise of drug development. And now what's happening is that there's an entire cadre of doctors and scientists and indeed policymakers and educators that are now starting to realize, hey, you know what? We can put our knowledge of health together with our knowledge of food. And when you combine those two together, you can weave this new tapestry to understand food as medicine. And that's really, I think, the exciting, undiscovered country ahead of us.
Oh, you couldn't be any more right, Will. It is such an exciting time. I'm excited. We're learning so much. And I can't help but share your optimism, and I really commend you for being a real leading figure in this field. It is, really admirable what's happening at the moment. Just linking ideas together, I know that you say that the science of health is really the future of medicine. What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, so think about yourself and myself as the average person. You sit down with a friend over a meal or over a beer in a pub, and basically you ask each other the question, what is health? Okay. And I can tell you, until a few years ago, I would probably give the same answer as anyone else who lives in my town. And I would say, well, that's an easy answer. Health is the absence of disease, right? So if you're not sick, then you're healthy. Well, that's actually an incredibly vacuous and oversimplified, and I think a dangerous way of thinking, which is that our health is just intrinsic to our existence until we are sick. Quite the opposite. The new research is showing, that I'm working on, is showing is that, which is the science of health, is showing is that health is absolutely not just the absence of disease, but rather it is the result of our body's hardwired health defense systems that are firing on all cylinders from the time we're born to our very last breath. These health defense systems were developed when we were in our mom's wombs. And in fact, they are primed to help us resist disease, but we have to work for it. Our body, our health systems, our body works for our health every single day. And what's interesting is that when you think about your body as a series of health defenses that are working to maintain health, it gives us the power to begin understanding what our day-to-day actions are, the choices we make, how that can influence our fates and our outcomes, and not just leaving our health in the hands of the medical doctors that we go to when we have a sniff or a cold or a tummy ache or worse. And so the science of health, I think, is going to completely shape the future of medicine, where in the future, medical doctors are going to first think about health and first understand how to protect it and do everything possible to help a patient, an individual, their family, the community remain as healthy as possible. And for those who are unable to avoid disease, of which there will be some people that cannot avoid disease, it will then leave us with sufficient resources because of the overall health of our population, with more resources to dedicate those resources to those who are unable to avoid disease. That is the only way to really be able to reconcile our growing knowledge of disease, the better tools that we're having to treat the diseases, which are very expensive, and yet this overwhelming, crushing burden of disease, in which there are people that could have avoided diseases by, having a better diet or lifestyle and taking care of themselves, that are unnecessarily forcing our society, our governments, our health systems to be able to invest scarce dollars to try to help everyone. So I think when I talk about the future of medicine, it's a technology future, it's a practice future, it's the policy, national policy, health policy future. It's not simply having some interesting research papers out there. This is going to be transformative. The more we understand health, the more we're going to actually be able to succeed in the quest to use medicine to help our fellow man.
You give this tremendous analogy of the body being like a medieval castle. I always find the most brilliant people which we speak to, they have the ability to take a hugely complex topic and be able to really bring it back down to something the lay person would understand. I thought this was a brilliant analogy. I'm just wondering, could you take us through that analogy which you give?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, most of us have had the opportunity to see a castle or a medieval fortress before, whether it's in a picture book or whether it's in a school class. In the United States, what do? We go to Disney, where they have recapitulated the European castles. And of course, I've had the privilege of seeing some really spectacular fortresses, castle fortresses in my travels, including in Europe. And the thing is that, I think all of us marvel when we look at it, when we go to a castle or a fortress, is it's just how powerful the structure is. It is clearly built to defend the people that live inside it. And some of the details that fortresses have been created with are very similar to how the body's been created. And so that's the analogy that I wrote about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease. By the way, the subtitle of that book is really The Beating Heart, the first third of the book, which is the new science of how your body can heal itself. And that's where the medieval castle comes in, the medieval fortress idea comes in, is how does our body defend itself? Why don't we get sick more often? And so let's jump back to the medieval fortress. You go to a castle, and of course today they're tourist attractions, and you just get to marvel at the architecture. But people who really know fortresses look more closely at how they are designed. These fortresses are amazingly designed, just like the body. For example, one of the obvious defenses there's defenses all over a castle. You get the moat. And so it's filled with, it's either a deep pit or it's filled with water, and it makes it difficult for people that to go over the moat. You've got you've got the gates that actually can be lowered over the moat so people can come in. You got the sloping wall, right? Very difficult to climb up a sloping wall, but also it was designed so that if you were defending the castle, you could drop a rock from the top, and the rock would shatter against the slope and send shrapnel to your enemy. Got the little arrow slits. You can actually fire arrows at your invaders. And then some of the less obvious things that I find to be like totally brilliant. Most people don't know, when you walk into the main entryway of a castle, into the foyer, so to speak. What are we doing? We're looking ahead to explore the rest of the castle. But if you look up in the entranceway, you'll see there's a hole above the ceiling. And that hole was called a murder hole, literally. And this was a hole in the ceiling for defenders, for if there was an invaders, for defenders to be able to drop rocks or scalding water or hot oil on top of an invader. What an amazing defense that was built. Also, the staircase in a castle. The staircase of a spiral staircase of a castle is usually going up clockwise. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. And why was it designed to be clockwise? As a defense of the castle. Because if it's winding up clockwise, the defenders who are on top of the stairs, who usually were right-handed, could swing their swords downwards. Whereas if you were an invader and right-handed, and you were going up a staircase, if you think about it, and you are right-handed, you would be disadvantaged at swinging upwards, and so the defenders would have the advantage. So all these kind of hidden traps and defense mechanisms in the castle are just part of this ingenious structure itself. And in the human body, we also are designed to defend ourselves against invaders of the body in the same way. And so what my work has revealed is that our health, being not just simply the absence of disease, is the result of at least 5 health defense systems, which I write about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, that are hardwired inside our bodies, just like the defense systems inside a fortress. So if you think about our body as a fortress, these defense systems allow us to repel invaders, to be able to fight off problems that occur and clean up problems that occur, and to allow our cells, our organs, our brain, to be able to rest more comfortably and securely within our body itself. And so that's really the analogy. In the same way that medieval fortresses are brilliantly designed to repel enemies and for its own defense, so too is our body designed and hardwired to be able to protect us against disease.
You talk about these at least 5 major health systems which we have. You give that amazing medieval castle analogy, and just looking at them, we've got angiogenesis, regeneration, the microbiome, DNA protection, immunity. So I suppose the question for me would be, in terms of these natural defense systems, what are we doing, or what could we potentially be doing day to day to damage or weaken those defense systems?
Right. Well, the first thing to understand is that each of these defense systems, the 5 that you just alluded to, angiogenesis, our circulation, regeneration, our stem cells, our microbiome, our healthy gut bacteria, our DNA, which is far more than a genetic code. It actually is not just a blueprint, it's actually a defensive system against the environment. And our immune system, which, our grandmothers all told us how important a good immunity is. But now we know that the immune system is so powerful, it could help us fight off cancer, even when it actually has spread, even when we're in our 80s and 90s. And so these defense systems are incredibly powerful. Before we get into them and talk about how food could actually impact them, let's talk about some of the damages, right? So most of us who care about health, try to exercise, get sleep, and, eat our veggies, plant-based diet, and so on and so forth. But what is the reality is that being a human being living on planet Earth, we are exposed from the moment we're born to environmental insults everywhere. The simplest one being sunshine, which is a little bit of sunshine is good for us. It actually helps our body produce, and activate vitamin D, which helps build strong bones. But think about the people who are out at the beach tanning, or in a tanning salon, or even stuck in traffic on a sunny day with the sun pouring through the windshield, right? Or at a picnic, or at a sporting event. And so in each of these cases, our body is being assaulted by powerful ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun. So why is it? And we know that ultraviolet light can actually damage our cells, and in fact on our skin, and can actually cause skin cancer, right? That's called melanoma. Wear sunblock. But given how much sun exposure we have, how come we don't actually develop skin cancer more often than we do, right? So the sun is one of these things that does damage to our bodies all the time. Our local environments. So you don't have to be a smoker yourself to be damaged by smoke. If you smell secondary smoke, which is somebody smoking nearby in a park or in a street corner, you're damaging your lungs by inhaling that smoke. Tertiary smoke is not even a person there, but even smoke, the residue left on a carpet, or if anybody's been in a hotel where somebody else has smoked in a room, that's tertiary smoke, also damaging to your body, what you're breathing in. Let me take it one step further in terms of damaging things we do for ourselves. For those of us who have not yet gotten onto the electric vehicle trend for the environment, most of us still drive cars that use petrol. Go to the petrol station and you pump gas. And I'll ask you, Joseph, do you stand, when you're filling your car with gas, do you stand upwind or downwind?
I'd be upwind, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so look, the thing is that if you smell the gas at all during the fueling, then you're standing downwind. So you're mindfully choosing to stand so where the fumes are not blowing into your face. But many people don't think about that. So you're just you're just doing your thing by filling your car with petrol, and your lungs are you're inhaling these noxious fumes that actually damage your DNA. Now, how come we don't get lung cancer, shortly after filling up our tank with gas? It's our body's defense systems that are working hard. Right now, let's move it to other things like the things that we do to our body. I'm going to get to the food in a second, but you don't get enough sleep, your immune system goes down. It damages your stem cells. It wrecks your metabolism. You don't get enough exercise. Our healthy gut bacteria, our microbiome, 39,000 bacteria that live inside and on our body, mostly in our gut, that help to defend ourselves. When you are not exercising, when you're sedentary, couch potato, as we sometimes call it, it changes the makeup of the ecosystem. You get more, quote, lazy people's bacteria, which are harmful and cause inflammation. So just sitting around can be damaging. And now let's talk about the foods. Fatty foods, processed meats, ultra processed foods, things that come in a box that, if you look on the side, are filled with ingredients that you can barely pronounce because they have so many letters in them. The huge factory produced chemically laden foods. Those kinds of foods actually damage our body from the inside out. So once we put them into our body, they start to dismantle our health defenses. They put a stress against our health defenses. So think about it like going into the medieval castle and starting to chip away at the stairwell of the spiral staircase, or doing something else that can really damage the inside structure. And so alcohol, drinking excessive alcohol can also be highly damaging, and not having enough of plants, the fiber from plants, actually can also alter the makeup of our body in terms of our health defenses as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that what we now realize is that health is not the absence of disease, it's the presence of our health defenses. And from the time that we are born on this planet, our body is exposed to all these assaults that occur just as a matter of living on planet Earth. Sometimes they're worse. Now you go to beyond sunshine and petrol. You go to work in a factory where you're working with all kinds of chemicals. That's even worse. You're amplifying the risks to yourself with the assaults. You choose bad diet. You don't get enough sleep. You don't exercise. All the things that we actually know intrinsically aren't good for us. We're now beginning to have a scientific understanding of what they do. They dismantle and take down our body's health defenses. So the question is, how do we avoid those harmful things? And more importantly, how do we build up our defenses? Because we can't avoid those assaults completely. So how do we just get stronger and better and more and have more fortitude?
I would love to know, In what way are you talking about using food as an investment for health, linking it back to those 5 defense systems? And then I suppose if you could just touch on how does that approach differ from the current, say, American food system, which I recently heard Dr. Daniel Amen say was worse than any damage ISIS could do.
Well, look, food as medicine is a contemporary, future-forward topic because we can now apply science to it. And again, this is where I'm coming from. My dual backgrounds as a doctor, taking care of both well and sick people who are looking at food as the missing tool in the toolbox, and also my role as a scientist, where I'm actually able to really think about, what we need to still know, what has yet to be worked out, and also to challenge the assumptions of the past. So that's the future forward part of it. But in fact, food is viewed as something important for health in the spirit of medicine by ancient cultures. Hippocrates was, in the West, first to actually talk about, let food be thy medicine and the medicine be thy food. In Asia, in China, Japan, India, the traditional healing practices are all involve something that they all involve food and food substances and herbs as part of their makeup. And I think that in the West, as I mentioned earlier, the emphasis that occurred, mid 20th century towards technology and pharmaceuticals and medical devices, amazing progresses, really kind of stole the emphasis away from, shifted the tide away from using food for health or for helping to manage disease, and left it kind of aground on the beach. And then that's exactly the moment when sort of post the sort of mid-century, the second half of the 20th century, that's where the post-World War II, the industrialization of commercial food began its own golden age. So in the West, in America, we went from a situation during wartime, let's say World War II, where food was scarce. Women and children were recruited to really try to create food stores for soldiers, to suddenly with the war being over and sort of this remaking, as sort of Europe was being remade, America rebuilt itself and demonstrated its prosperity by having a richness, a diversity of foods that were cheap and convenient. And so the current approach that we're all struggling with in the West of American food is basically founded on this idea that it's possible to eat almost anything at any time in a very convenient way that is inexpensive. And what evolved from the commercialization of big food, mass food, commercial food is a trade-off of lower quality for lower cost. And then you put marketing on top of it, and you let the media, television, now the internet, sweep everywhere. And essentially we have been inundated with marketing messages that tasty foods that have been literally designed to hijack our brain's addiction centers with salt, with fat, with sugar, and that are cheap and convenient. You can get anywhere. Like we've kind of become zombies of that entire enterprise. And in so doing, we have actually allowed ourselves to embark on everyday practice, whether it's at the workplace, whether it's at the vending machine, whether at the train station, whether it's on an airplane, almost anywhere you go at a grocery store, even, you wind up actually seeing something cheap, inexpensive, and mass processed, filled with chemicals that you can quickly get and pop into your mouth. And what does that do? It damages our health defense systems, right? So, so the whole idea of food as medicine is really kind of a return to the past, but not using medieval thinking. Quite the opposite. Really using the momentum of science, really to be able to slice through our preconceived notions to really discover new ways of actually using foods that can be really helpful. So how does that investment in health actually play out? Well, it plays out in a couple of different ways. Number one, if we know our health defense systems, which I'll go through in a second, and we know that foods can actually boost, support, amplify, activate, engage our health defenses, make us better than we want to be, help us be all we can be when it comes to health defense. Then we have a completely new mindset in how we make a decision of what we put into our body, and that mindset is not simply, the mantra that's now being spoken. You should eat more plant-based foods. You should become a vegan. You should avoid gluten. You should go keto, right? So those are equally populist ways of actually thinking about things, oversimplification. What I would say is that we're now realizing, the science is teaching us, that we can go to a farmer's market, a farm stand, we could go to a grocery store, we can go to a village open air market, we could even go to a supermarket, and with knowledge that science has delivered, we can pick and choose from fruits and vegetables, nuts and legumes. We can even choose from certain kinds of meats, although not really red meat. We can choose even from the dairy section, certain foods, and even in the middle aisles of the supermarket, which we've been taught to, don't go into the middle aisle. It's all processed foods. There are some things in that middle aisle that can be actually really, really health defense activating. And so what I wrote about in my book, ETP Defeat Disease, is let's remove all the religion like fervor that is characterizes the people who are thinking about health and food, and let's just look at the facts, Jack. What foods, as we navigate through the supermarket, actually activate our health defense systems? What are those health defense systems, and then how do we integrate this into our everyday lives in a way that makes us enjoy our life rather than fear what we eat?
Oh wow! I seriously hope that people study this episode and take notes. I know I certainly am. There's just so much gold in this. One thing that I cannot let you go without first talking about is immunotherapy. Your TED Talk, by this point, I think it must have like 11 million plus views on YouTube. When I think about immunotherapy, this is a very contemporary, like what you just discussed, but there with the food as medicine being a contemporary approach. Immunotherapy, it now offers an entirely new approach to chemotherapy, for example. And immunotherapy, that works in the sense of it just completely enhancing your body's natural defenses, right? You offer the example of immunotherapy reversing cancer without the side effects and toxins that chemotherapy brings. Chemotherapy, it works by blasting out the bad cells in your body, but simultaneously it also just blitzes through the good ones in your body as well, which obviously we don't want. And you give the example that the immunotherapy approach, this worked for your mother, right, who wiped out cancer within 30 days. But when I read into the work for this, you highlight that immunotherapy is only effective for roughly 20% of people. So why does immunotherapy work so well for someone like your mother, but yet it doesn't work for everyone? Like I said, it'll only statistically work for 1 in 5 people.
Yeah, well, so the first thing that your listeners need to know is that immunotherapy is a gigantic breakthrough in the fight against cancer. And in fact, last year was recognized with the Nobel Prize of Medicine and Physiology. So this is a big deal. And the big deal is that we can now do something different than treat cancer patients with drugs like chemotherapy that are designed to kill everything in its path, including cancer. When you're killing a cancer, you also destroy your immune system. You also destroy your healthy organs, which is why the side effects are so bad. Immunotherapy is a completely different way of thinking, which is, you know what, the body has its own defenses called the immune system. Let's stoke up those defenses, let's fire those defenses up, and let's use our own defenses to actually kill cancer. So a number of different approaches have been developed to actually tackle cancer. You can cut off the blood supply, you can amp up the immune system, and immunotherapy actually is the latter. You sometimes combine it with chemotherapy, but sometimes you don't need to. You can go it alone. And in my mother's case, who had metastatic endometrial cancer, who in her 80s, the question is, how would an elderly person tolerate chemotherapy? The answer is not very well. So we gave her immunotherapy because it was a state of the art, never had to do chemotherapy. And we stripped off the cloak that cancers use to hide from the immune system. And in so doing, revealed to an 80-year-old person's immune system that was powerful enough to wipe out the cancer, just with literally three infusions, 3 treatments that had very little side effects in her case. Now, that's called a complete response, and she's doing very well to this day without cancer, never having received chemotherapy, and only using her immune system really as the primary weapon of choice. It's quite amazing. I never thought I would see this in my own career. And fortunately, my own mother was able to benefit from it. But not everybody benefits. And what we're beginning to realize is that there's different ways to help activate the immune system. The one my mother benefited from requires that cloak that cancers use, which is called PDL1, and you can actually measure whether or not a cancer is using that kind of a cloak. If they're not, you might actually use a different type of immune therapy or one that's yet to be developed. The other thing we're beginning to realize is even more stunning. Speaking to the health defenses of your microbiome, your gut bacteria being one of our defenders. Is that one of my colleagues, Dr. Laurence Zipvogel in Paris, she's a leading researcher in the Institut Gustave Roussy in Paris, found that in 200 consecutive people with cancer who were treated with immunotherapy, if she separated the ones who responded and did really well from the ones who didn't respond, right? Most of them don't respond that well. The only difference that could be found was a single missing bacteria in the gut of people who did not respond. That is a bombshell, like jaw-dropping to think that a single bacteria or the absence thereof could lead your body not to respond to a life-saving immunotherapy. And that bacteria has been identified called Akkermansia muciniphila. It's a normal, healthy gut bacteria that loves to grow in the mucus of our gut. And guess what? That bacteria is so sensitive. You take a common antibiotic used to treat bronchitis, for example, you will wipe out that bacteria with just a couple of pills, and you can't grow it back. You can't eat it back with a probiotic as yet. The only way you can actually help to grow back that Akkermansia, that life-saving bacteria that Dr. Zipvogel and now others have found and verified the finding, is with food. It turns out that pomegranate juice, real pomegranate juice, contains a natural chemical, a bioactive called elagitannins that cause our body, when we put that into our body, the chemicals in pomegranate juice naturally cause our gut, our intestines, to secrete the mucus. So all natural, to secrete the mucus that the Akkermansia, that life-saving bacteria, loves to thrive in. So drinking pomegranate juice can actually grow back the bacteria to allow you to actually respond to the immunotherapy. So here's an example of food, not food as medicine, but food and medicine can make all the difference in the world. And we're just starting to peel back the first couple of layers of the onion to show just how powerful foods can be in influencing our health defenses, including in situations like immunotherapy.
Are there maybe 2 to 3 particular items, maybe from your list you've got 200 or so items on there, these incredible things that would be particularly effective in terms of either preventing or reversing cancer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I wrote about 200 foods because I really wanted to be able to demonstrate that when you look at the science alone, the evidence, the data shows that it's not just a few foods and not just green colored foods that actually can bring benefits, but a whole range of foods that we actually already love. And I also wanted to be able to clear up. I tell people that, I have a vendetta against confusion, and I really dislike it when the science tells us one thing, but the common urban legends say something else, and then it makes everybody confused, like it does for food and health. And so I wanted to put 200 some foods in my book to really just present all the information out there and find foods that you love. Start with those, because if you already love them, you're already ahead of the game. So let's pick 3 foods that actually I write about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, that actually can fight cancer, and the evidence shows that it's effective. So I'm going to start with soybeans, soy foods, tofu, because it's controversial. And we know that soy has recently gotten kind of a scary reputation because some people believe that the estrogen, the plant estrogens found in soybeans, could actually cause breast cancer. And we know that some human breast cancers are sensitive to estrogen, human estrogen. But now what the science shows us is that plant estrogens look nothing like human estrogens. Even though they carry the same name, they're very different. And in fact, plant estrogens block human estrogens and actually can lower the risk for breast cancer. Now, how do we know this is true? In humans, it turns out that there was a study of 5,000 women who already have breast cancer. These are the highest risk women because they already have the disease. And they studied the amount of soy foods they ate, and found that the women who ate more soy had a less chance of dying from their breast cancer. And if their cancer was well treated with surgery, they had a lower chance, about a 30% risk, lower risk of actually having their cancer come back. 30% lower mortality, 30% lower chance of having their cancer come back. And this is with women who ate more soy. So the question is, how much soy did they have to eat? About 10 grams of soy protein a day. And how much is that? That's about the amount of soy protein that's in a typical glass of soy milk. So lots of different kinds of soy foods, overturning the myth of soy being dangerous for breast cancer, quite the opposite. And this is supported by scientific evidence in the lab, in cells, in animals, in humans, and now in populations. So soy is the first food I want to talk about. The second is...
Sorry, Will, can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a study on this done in, was it Shanghai?
Yes, it's a Shanghai women's breast cancer study. That this is that 5,000.
That's it. Yeah, all right. Yeah, amazing. We'll link that below. Yeah.
Well, and I'll also tell you that, I mean, anybody who's interested, you could dive into the book. I have in the back part of my book some additional notes for people that are really interested in digging into the study and looking at the references and looking at the study in more detail. But, and some people say, well, look, that's just one study, even though it's 5,000 people. It's a lot of people. What I will tell you that further, there's been a meta-analysis, and that's combining 14 different studies looking at soy and breast cancer. And in every single case, the results and the combined results have been very consistent, showing that the more soy you eat, the better survival is from breast cancer. And in no case, over 14 studies, do you see increase in death. Wow. And so, this is powerful stuff if you just look at the facts. Another powerful food is tea. Green tea contains EGCG. It's a natural catechin, a polyphenol found in tea. When you take tea and brew a cup of tea, those natural chemicals dissolve from the tea leaf into the liquid that you drink in green tea. And we used to think that it's just like a tea bag, but you can also have whole tea leaves. You could have matcha, which is green tea that's ground up, like in a Japanese restaurant, they will often serve green tea that's really a brilliantly green, kind of a opaque greenness to the tea. That's the entire leaf ground up, and you drink that, and it what you're doing is you're putting into your body these natural chemicals found in the tea leaf that actually cut off the blood supply feeding cancer. It starves cancer by cutting off its blood supply naturally without harming your normal blood supply. And it turns out that drinking up to 4 cups or more of green tea a day can lower your risk of colon cancer. And that makes a lot of sense because the tea is rushing right through your system and being absorbed, but also other cancers as well. Lung cancer can also be benefits. So, and then some people say, well, I don't know if I really like green tea. Turns out that black tea can also have some benefits, but black tea does something different. Black tea actually has natural chemicals that prompt our body to release our own stem cells that can help regenerate our heart and help our organs work better and help our brains work better. So it's really, really quite amazing what tea can do. The last one I'll tell you is tomatoes. I love tomatoes. If you pick a tomato off a vine and cut it up in your salad, it's amazingly juicy and tasty. There's an urban legend now that tomatoes are dangerous to eat because they contain, because they're related to the nightshade, which is a deadly plant, and that there are toxins called lectins found in the skin of tomatoes. And, first of all, lectins are hundreds of different kinds of molecules, and some of them are toxic. The ones in tomatoes are not. Secondly, the proof is in the pudding, because tomatoes don't just contain lectins that are harmless. They also contain other really powerfully beneficial materials like lycopene, which is a natural chemical that can cut off the blood supply that could feed prostate cancer. And a study of 36,000 men called the Harvard Men's Follow-Up Study, Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, found that those men who ate 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes every week, 2 to 3 servings only, and each serving is a half a cup. So that's just a little bit of red sauce in a pasta or some other, or maybe even a little bit of a tomato juice. Twice a week, 2 to 3 times a week, had an up to 30% reduction in the risk of developing prostate cancer. And what the lycopene does is it cuts off the blood supply feeding prostate cancer, so prostate cancer can't grow. Why do you have to cook the tomato? Well, it turns out that lycopene on the vine tends not to be able to be easily absorbed by our gut. So Mother Nature on the vine created lycopene in a form that the body, kind of absorbs a little bit, but most of it kind of runs right through us. But if you heat the tomato and you simmer it, ideally at the temperature that olive oil can bring it to, you would slowly, gently change the chemistry, the natural chemistry, into a form the body avidly loves to absorb. And now the lycopene in cooked tomato sauce, ideally cooked with olive oil, because lycopene dissolves in oil. So when you have tomato sauce, tomatoes cooked in olive oil, and you eat that, the oil brings it right into your bloodstream and absorbs it really well. You can double or even triple the amount of lycopene your body absorbs when it's cooked. Think about what that means. That is the Mediterranean diet, right? So cooked tomatoes and so again, so I would say soy foods, tea, not just green tea, tomatoes, the delicious raw, even better for you, and activate your cancer defense systems when cooked, are 3 top foods that I would recommend to everyone.
That is amazing. Our audience will love that so much. And on a personal note, for you, Will, you seem to have been very relentless in the last few years with all this amazing work in which you're doing. I think I heard you saying that by this point the FDA they've approved, I think it was like 32 of your findings. I bet they must be sick of seeing your name. You've just created this amazing book. I suppose, what's next for you personally, and where can our audience connect with you?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm just getting started in what I've done. And although it is true that, I've used science to help to create more than 30 FDA-approved drugs and devices to help treat diseases like cancer and prevent blindness and to help heal problems in diabetes, the reality is all the science now is pointing me in the direction of actually applying this to help us really biohack into how foods can be used to improve our health, treat disease, and restore us back to full function, even if we are sick. And so 200 Foods is where we started with. I wrote about it in my book, Eat to Beat Disease. You can buy my book anywhere that books are sold, online or in bookstores. My favorite is actually to go to, the traditional bookstore because, I'm a little old fashioned that way. It's like record stores. I like going to Amazon. I like iTunes, but man, there's nothing that quite like going into a bookstore or going to a record store and flipping through things. That's just me, but I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. You get to explore and find things. And so anywhere books are sold, you can buy my book. You can also come to my website at Dr. Dr. William Li, L-I is my last name, .com. It's Dr. William li.com. And for anybody who comes to my website, I have something that I really wanted to provide to people who are interested in my work, and that is a free downloadable shopping list. So I took the 200 foods, the best ones, and I organized them into a shopping list in the order in which you would find them in a grocery store. So if you've got this list, download for free, just sign up and download the thing for free. You can just take this list with you. You can stick it onto a mobile phone. You can put it in your pocket and just go into a grocery store and just pick off stuff that's good for you. It makes it like easy peasy, no brainer. You don't have to work too hard at picking out the healthy foods for you. So my website, drwilliamlee.com, please sign up, get a free shopping list, buy my book. And also you can find me on social media, my Facebook as Dr. Dr. William Lee, and also on Instagram and Twitter. And so, I'm really looking forward to connecting with your audience. There's a lot more to come in the coming year. It's only going to get more exciting. And by the way, one thing to let your audiences know is that, look, I'm not a vegan. I'm not a gluten-free person. I am a foodie. I enjoy eating. And I believe that our food teaches us something about our families, our history, and our cultures. And that's different for everybody. So my approach to eating healthy is really leaning into the foods that we love, that our culture delivered to us, and not to fear food, but to really find the foods that we already love and start with those healthy choices that can allow us to build on things that are not just good for us, but also they taste good to us.
My word, this has been a sensational podcast. I just got one last question to wrap it up. This is sort of, it could be maybe related to the work, but we always ask at the end if, in a scenario in which hypothetically every person on this planet was tuned into the same frequency, and unfortunately your 5 health defense systems, they may be letting you down by this point, you may not have long left, and you could give one short but impactful message to the world based on your life, what would Dr. William Lee's message be?
I would say eat delicious, fresh, cooked foods that you love, and start with plant-based foods. And that is the easiest way to embark on a message that anyone can build on.
Dr. Lee, this has been an absolute pleasure connecting with you, your passion for your field, your quest for truth, and it's been a real, amazing conversation. And from myself and the team here, we pay our gratitude to the work in which you're doing, and I certainly hope that this isn't the last time that we connect.
Well, thank you, Joseph. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm looking forward to engaging with your audience, and happy to come back at any time. We can pick a topic that you think would be resonant, and the amazing thing about health defense is it applies to almost anything. And when it comes to food, whether it's a holiday, it's a birthday, it's a controversy, it's something in the news, you can count on me to come back and give you my point of view.